What does it mean to create a classroom of abundance? How can we make multiple iterations of work an integral part of our learning culture? How can we build strong relationships with our students at the start of the school year? Welcome back to another episode of the Teachers on Fire podcast, airing live on YouTube every Saturday morning at 8 a.m. Pacific, 11 a.m. Eastern. My name is Tim Cavey, and my mission here is to warm your heart, spark your thinking, and ignite your professional practice. Today's Teacher on Fire is Adrian Neibauer. Adrian is a public school educator in Colorado with 20 plus years of experience in helping students find their voices. His elementary classes rely on design thinking as a process for creativity and innovation. Forever a student of teaching, Adrian runs learning experiments in his classroom to collect feedback on what's working and tweak the things that are not. You can connect with Adrian online at the following places: adrianneibauer.substack.com. On LinkedIn, connect with Adrian there. On YouTube, check out @Adrian Neibauer and email him. That's a bold offer. Thank you, Adrian. Email him directly at mrneibauer@gmail.com. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me today on the show. Adrian, are you ready to light it up?
I'm ready. Thanks for having me, Tim.
What a pleasure it is. You and I have connected for some time in the writing world. I think that was really our primary point of connection for a while, and on X, formerly Twitter. And now we are doing this thing live, and that is really a treat for me. So thank you so much for joining me today, Adrian. I know you're familiar with my content. And by the way, I should say a huge thank you, Adrian, for your support of the Teachers on Fire podcast. That has meant the world to me over the last months and years. Share with us, Adrian, about a low moment or an experience of adversity that you faced somewhere in your teaching or education journey, and then importantly, describe how did you overcome it?
Yeah, I would say the last couple years have been challenging for me. Those years post-pandemic, coming back to the classroom right during the pandemic, and they were some pretty low years teaching. I was feeling really burned out, feeling like really just frustrated, having a hard time motivating my kiddos. Student misbehavior was high. Kids were missing school. And so I was really feeling pretty low just in the last couple years. And I was just struggling with motivating myself to stay positive. And one of the ways that I overcame that was really just leaning into my colleagues and really this idea of leaning into the humanity of my kiddos, my students. Instead of just the stress was around trying to push content under these circumstances with the pandemic that were really, really challenging. So remote learning, then when we get back to the classroom, it's social distancing, we're masked up. We can't really touch each other. I can't, interact with kids in the same way. And so what really helped me, I think, overcome those obstacles was this idea of doubling down on my kids as people and us all as humans going through this experience together. And when I did that, it really helped me just be more positive about what we're going through together, and leaning on my colleagues for support, leaning on other teachers in the building for support, and really just being more human about teaching. I think that's really helped me shift my mindset to be more positive going into this upcoming school year. So
thank you so much for sharing that. Adrian, I know you're not alone in terms of the number that COVID did on teachers, our colleagues, the profession at large. And I'd love to hear that story of how you've worked your way through it. And I know you've written and reflected about that as well. And we'll talk more about that, I'm sure, as we go along. Well, congrats on, I believe, your 22nd year of teaching. What are a few of your go-to activities that help to build relationships with the students during your first weeks of school?
Yeah, I love building community those first weeks of school. I try and push off doing as much content as I can early on, at least the standardized curriculum content. We do writing, we do reading, but nothing that's like a part of our curriculum. So I love doing like things, I have kids do like a social identity wheel or a personal identity wheel where they can share who they are beyond just I traveled this summer, or I have 3 brothers and sisters, going a little bit deeper into describing themselves. I play a lot of music in the classroom. I tell a lot of stories through the music I play. We do this great project in the first week of school where I have kids make a playlist. I call it the playlist of our lives, or the playlist of my life. I've been doing this project for a little while now, and I've been tweaking it all throughout. Every year I do something a little bit different, but Now I've included other media that they can add. So the idea is that kids can pick a song or a movie or a TV show or a YouTuber that really means a lot to them, that tells us, and they can tell a story about how they're connected to that. So, I'll play music and tell a story about a particular song that reminds me of my mom and this memory I have with my mom driving around in her car listening to Cher or something like that, or Madonna. And so I share getting to know each other, being vulnerable in front of my students through different ways that are just a little untraditional, not through like the bingo cards and the icebreakers. So we do a lot of that. And so that has to do with like a narrative writing project. So I get to get kids telling stories about themselves, writing things down. We do a lot of community building. So we over me, this idea of our community is greater than the sum of its parts. That's a big part of my ethos. So we do a lot of work with leaning on each other and understanding what it means to, help each other out, that we're all learning together. Just a lot of, we do classroom commitments. I almost forgot about that one. We make not so much like, here's Mr. Neibauer's rules, but let's come up with some commitments based on our values. So we spent some time exploring values, and I do a lot of stuff with Brene Brown's work and her braving framework. So we do a lot of values work and have that turn into creating some classroom commitments, things that we commit to do as learners, so that we can create a positive learning environment for everyone.
Those classroom commitments, I feel like I've seen them on X. Are they done on chart paper, sort of collaboratively around the room, or can you describe that a little bit?
Yeah, so we started off with, I'll share Brene Brown's braving framework. And so BRAVING, each letter is an acronym, boundaries, reliability, integrity, things like that, accountability. And so we'll make some mind maps of what those things look like. We'll put like, what does boundaries look like? And just get some big chart paper, markers, really make them big and colorful. Then we start consolidating those down to some of our key values. Kids are sharing what their boundaries are. What does it mean to have integrity to them? And then that final classroom commitment sheet that I posted in my classroom, I actually designed that on Canva. And so it's just to put all of the different commitments that we agreed, and there's a nice big bar for them to sign, and we get everybody's signature. And that's a central part of my classroom, where that's like almost like our classroom contract. Like, these are our commitments. And then what's great is that anytime I get a new student, it's a great place to start. The kids want to like bring them over to the classroom commitments and say, here's what we commit to. We just got a new student last week and brought them over, show them the commitments. Actually, I overheard them talking about values, which was a great, like, heartwarming teacher moment for me. Like, they're now paying it forward and teaching it. And then we got added her signature to the list. So it's a great way to start the week for school.
So good. And I hope people are hearing just the depth of Adrian's classroom, his elementary classroom. I am not familiar with Brene Brown's braving. I'll have to check that out. And it sounds like there's a lot to unpack in that little acronym. I wanted to add one thing to what you were saying about the music and the music selections and the tie-in for meaning. I remember there used to be an education podcast called the Personal Playlist Podcast. I don't know if you have ever come across it, Adrian, but
write that down.
I honestly don't know her standing today, because unfortunately she ran into some copyright issues. But the idea was that she would interview separate educators in every episode and ask them for their hype song, their inspiration song, sort of a more meaningful inspiration song, and then a song that they associate with something nostalgic, something from their childhood or something like that. And I don't know if I'm getting it exactly right, but when you bring music into the equation and then you connect music to stories, wow, it's so powerful. And she did the same, a very similar activity with her students. So that was something that you sparked there, and just what you were talking about in terms of what you do with your students. Well, let's keep going, Adrian. Your X bio defines your mission as classroom learning experience designer, creating classrooms of abundance. I thought few educators out there have such a poetic bio. So can you say more about these two pieces? They sound wonderful.
So the learning experience designer is really just, I am a teacher first and foremost. But teacher, educator, the word teacher doesn't really do what we do justice as a title.
Right.
And I found myself when I would share with people what I did, especially once I left the classroom for a bit, people, their eyes wouldn't glaze over, but there'd just be a little bit of like okay, or even some like, oh, I'm so sorry, like things must be really hard right now. So, but when I started doing things like with design work, and I started thinking about this idea of designing and designers going through an iterative process, I really saw tie-ins to that's what I do as a classroom teacher. And so I started shifting my terminology from lesson plans to learning experiences. And I'm not teaching learning experiences, I'm designing learning experiences. So that's where the learning experience designer came from. And then the abundance piece, I got a lot of that work from Astro Teller at Google and Peter Diamandis. They're very big on social media, but it's this idea like teachers and public education is so structured around scarcity. We have a scarcity of time, scarcity of money, scarcity of resources, and everything is like we have to teach to the minute. If you have a curriculum that especially a brand new curriculum, often they tell you have this many minutes, 17 minutes to do this thing, or 6.5 minutes to do this hook exercise. And it gets us into thinking of there's just not enough time in the day to do everything that you want to do. And it's just all scarcity. So when I say that I'm a teacher of abundance, I really try and push back on these areas, these structures in our system that give us this idea of scarcity. So I try and let the content areas blend into one another. I tried to push back as much as I can. Obviously, kids want to go to lunch and recess on time. So we're definitely hitting that time stamp. But I try and let the subjects blend into each other a bit so that, when we're doing something in math, it's related to what we're going to be doing in social studies a little bit later or science a little bit later in the day. So there's more of this idea that we have an abundance of learning and to be happening in the classroom, and it doesn't have to be so siloed. And then just in terms of my community, I'm very much an equity-minded person. And so, everyone is getting something from me and from each other that might not be the same, but there's an abundance of us, of our compassion, our learning, our humanity to go around for everybody. So just because I'm helping someone else doesn't mean I can't be a part of helping somebody else right now. So I really just try and instill as much abundance thinking in my classroom as I can.
Such a different mindset than a sort of scraping around, desperation, kind of everyone fend for themselves. We've got limited resources here, a zero-sum game kind of mindset, which you're right, we hear too much of in education. I can tell just by the way you're describing it, that's the same language that you use with your students. And I'm thinking of going back to the learning experience designer, and I'll put that back on the screen for a moment. I so love that language. And something I try to do is instead of referring to assignments, I like to refer to learning activities because I think language is important. And assignments, when you think about it, don't mean much other than a task. What are we actually about? Why are we doing them? We want to learn. And I think that's, you're taking it one level higher and saying we're not only doing an activity, we're going to take in this experience. So I love and appreciate that. I'll try to bring that into my practice as well. Adrian, something we talked about briefly off air that I'm really interested to get into is you've got great experience and expertise in the area of STEM and design thinking, and you also, of course, teach ELA. And something I see in your English classroom is opportunities for feedback and multiple iterations of work. So can you say more about how you bring design thinking into your English classroom and provide multiple iterations of work?
Yeah, I think most teachers, especially at the elementary level, are familiar with some sort of a writing process. There's some sort of a pre-writing, drafting, revision, publishing type of a cycle. And I'm sure a lot of teachers can empathize with this. When you get kids to start revising, it's like pulling teeth sometimes because they think that the first time they typed it out, that's perfect. Mr. Neibauer, that's great. I don't want to change a thing, right? And so when I help kids see their writing as part of a design process, so they're writing designers. I use this language that I got from John Warner. He has this great book called The Writer's Practice, but he says writing is thinking. And if we're going to be actually thinking, the thoughts are not going to be the clearest. And so I want to be very intentional. John Warner is very big on making sure that he has an audience and a purpose. And then we go through the process. So kids are very mindful of what the audience is. Sometimes I give them a specific audience. It's not just to turn it into me for me to grade and then hand it back to them. Sometimes they're writing to each other. And like, for example, the last piece we just did was some instructional writing. They had to give someone instructions on something that they're really good at. They have some expertise on. And they wanted to share their expertise with somebody else in the room who didn't know how to do something. So now we have an actual user. In the design world, they call them users, but we have an audience member. And I need to beta test this piece on this person. Are my directions clear, right? And so I love it because they're watching them follow their directions and they want to like help. They want to be like, no, this is what this means. But I'm like, I have to make them sit on their hands and say, I need you just taking notes. You're a designer. This is what I do when I do a learning experience. I sit back and I watch the class go and I see what's working and what's not. That's what I want you to do. What's working and what's not. And now we're going to revise. Now we're going to go back, and it's not even, I still use the word revision, but revision means something a little bit different now. It's now about being clear in our voice, in our directions, in our writing. It's not so much the editing and the polishing and the run-on sentences. That comes later. But especially up front, I want them to be able to iterate their writing so they can make their voice much clearer. And in an ideal world, I would probably have them do that twice. Have them go back, tweak some things, and then test it on the user again, or another person again, a student again. Usually because of time, like we talked about with scarcity, I can only get about one iterative cycle through. But it's a great way of getting kids to see that the process of writing is more, I think, important than the final product. So that's just one example specifically in my writing classroom. We do some different things in reading as well, because ELA we do, in terms of my literacy classroom and really reading passages more than once. We're not just reading one time through. We're taking some time to really go through, and like each time we're reading something, we're highlighting something different, or we're taking notes. That's kind of what iterative learning looks like in my classroom, specifically for my ELA classroom.
Well, and that's the key, right, is making sure that we've actually connected with the real audience, or a real audience. I think in so many English classes, certainly the ones that we grew up in, there wasn't really any actual connection with the audience. It was always just writing for the teacher. Yeah. And so you're giving students, I love what you described there, because you're giving them a very real world, authentic experience of an audience. They're not allowed to clarify in the moment. I love that. And they can see actually the direct result of their writing and what needs to be improved in a very real, visceral way, a real-time experience. And I think that's so valuable. And I can just imagine in different contexts, different kinds of writing, persuasive writing, and so on, how that could play out. So thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you for joining us, Teachers on Fire. If you're getting value from this conversation, give this video a like on LinkedIn, YouTube, or wherever you may be viewing. Adrian, you write passionately and thoughtfully about your learning journey and teaching practice on Substack. What motivates you to write there? And I wonder if we should actually back up for a moment and just give people a 20-second view of what is Substack.
So Substack is it's new to me. I've only been on Substack for about a year, but I think it's been around for about 3 years. And it's a platform that's come out, I think, in response to social media changing some options. And it's a great place for writers to self-publish. It reminds me of like old blogging, where people have a lot of people call them newsletters, but they're essentially blogs. A lot of professional writers are out there, and you can have a free subscription, or you can have I call a freemium, where certain articles are free. And then if you want to go further in the article, you pay to become a paid subscriber. And it's really a great way for writers to connect with their readers, and then for readers to show their love to writers through financial means, being able to support them as writers. So it's a great community. Like I said, I've been on there for about a year, writing weekly about my experiences in the classroom. And I love writing. I started writing really seriously during pandemic, because I needed a way to process my emotions, my thinking. And so I started actually publishing monthly about what it was like to be in the classroom. It was almost like, I don't want to say a diary entry, but it was like, okay, here, day 35 of, COVID classroom. What is it? What am I thinking? What am I doing? How am I feeling? Things like that. And it's now formed an integral habit that I do pretty much every day, every week. And over on Substack, I love being able to connect with other educators. And a big value of mine is to be able to pay it forward and share what I'm doing in the classroom. Not because I think what I'm doing is the best, but I really just want, if what I'm doing has value to somebody else, if I can help somebody else who's struggling to explain a concept to their students or create a learning experience in their classroom, I want to do it. And so I would say my newsletter is somewhere between, confessional, here's what I'm thinking about education, the bigger education. And then I always try and share at least a handful of resources tied into what I'm writing about. And then once a month, I do what's called the top 5. And those are just totally random. They can be top 5 movies I'm watching, top 5 books I'm reading, but it could be anything. And it's just been a great place to connect with other educators, other writers, and be able to have conversations with the people that you write for. Well, like we were talking about audience, I think it's easy sometimes on social media or on the internet with blogging. At least I remember in the early 2000s, like you'd post a blog post and you have no idea who's reading it. Like it's just out there. And very few people would actually make comments. Now I feel like I can actually connect to readers. People can say, well, what did you mean by this? Can you tell me more about this? And it's just a great way of chatting with my actual readers. So I love writing. I absolutely love writing. It fills me up. Definitely lights my fire.
Well, that was part of my question is, what do you get out of it? And so there's our answer, folks. It lights your fire and fills you up and fuels your passion for the profession. And I so love that. I said right off the top that you're a student of teaching. We need more people like you, Adrian, on our staff teams and in our buildings, because sometimes teachers, let's face it, they just sort of feel like there's not enough left in the tank to actually be deeply reflective on their practice. But you find that margin, and I want to commend you for it and encourage you, viewer and listener, if you haven't checked out Adrian's work on Substack, get over there and create an account, get involved. And even if you're just reading, we've got Adrian, we've got people like Marcus Luther putting out quality stuff all the time. So over 600 subscribers in a year. I look forward to following your journey there on Substack. One more thing about Substack too is that you talked about the community, and you're familiar with this idea that different Substacks can recommend to their readers that you subscribe and check out these other Substacks. It's kind of just the way they've built it into the ecosystem. And so sometimes even when I'm going through a bit of a writing drought, I will see, someone from Adrian's Substack came over and subscribed to my Substack. And so that's a really fun element and helps to build that sort of collegial feel that perhaps you are looking for as an education writer. So can't say enough about that platform. And as you know, of course, I'm coming from another platform called Medium, and I still enjoy Medium, but Substack has got a lot of nice features going for it, doesn't it?
Yeah, for sure.
In May 2023, Adrian, you published a video titled Why I Teach on your YouTube channel. Why have you considered quitting in the past? Let's get real about that. And what keeps you coming back to the classroom?
Yeah, so I alluded to that a little bit with just how challenging it's been these last few years post-COVID. Teaching in a post-COVID world, I mean, we know as educators, there's a lot of cracks in our public education system. And I think it's safe to say that the pandemic really exposed or exacerbated a lot of these cracks. And so those years post-COVID, I was really struggling. I was becoming kind of demoralized, getting burned out, not feeling super, supported. I was just kind of feeling overwhelmed and overworked, and I didn't have a lot in my tank when I was coming home at the end of the day. There was a lot of stress in the classroom, a lot of stress outside of the classroom. And in a moment of weakness, I don't know, weakness is the right word, just in a moment of really raw vulnerability, why am I doing this? Why am I teaching? If it's really this hard, if I'm not enjoying it, maybe I should get out. I've had a good run. I've been teaching for 20 years. Maybe I should get out. And saying those words out loud made me sick to my stomach. I was like, I love teaching. Adrian, you love teaching, but why? I had to dig into the why. Why do I love teaching? And it took a few, like I said, few iterations. I had to go from some abstract things to concrete things, and it really just came down to my students. I do it for my students. I love being a part of their lives. I love seeing their faces light up when they understand a concept. I love laughing with them. I love sharing hard moments with them. I love teaching and learning with my students. It's really always been about my students. And I think what happened during the pandemic is it became a lot about curriculum and learning loss and trying to get kids caught up. And kids became data points and not actual kids. I teach fifth grade, I teach 10-year-olds. And I needed a good reminder that these 10-year-olds are somebody else's babies. Just like it, I want my own children's teachers to treat them the way or see them as my children. These kids are somebody else's babies, and I want to treat them with dignity, with empathy, with respect. And what's funny about that is when I came back to that why, things started getting better. And I think really positive mindset begets positive mindset. I started not, I mean, the stressors, the obstacles, the challenges never went away. Things got a little bit easier. But when I started leaning into my humanity and the humanity of my teachers, of my students, things felt bearable, doable. And not only that, my fire started to get reignited a little bit, and I started to come back to really enjoying my time in the classroom. And now this is the start of year 22, and I'm really hopeful. I think we're going to have a great year this year. I'm super excited.
Sometimes on Teacher X, we see this question or this comment, remember your why. And it can almost be overdone to the point where it can become a little bit trite or less than meaningful. But I would challenge you, viewer and listener, to follow in Adrian's footsteps, pull out the camera, pull out the phone, and actually record a video. Why do you teach? And I think that will unpack a little bit deeper substance, and it certainly did for Adrian, and that was an interesting watch. So I encourage you to check out his YouTube channel and track down that particular video and others that he's published there. On a related note, Adrian, speaking to the veteran teacher, I felt like you had some really comforting and encouraging messages. So I know we're in a sort of a similar space, but thinking about that veteran teacher who perhaps has been a little discouraged, or maybe they're feeling, and this is the part that you spoke to, maybe they're feeling like they just haven't been themselves. They haven't been that teacher that they want to be, the one that they idealize since 2020. Speak to that teacher for a minute.
I think it's really important not to isolate yourself. And I know that the pandemic kind of it forced us to isolate. And in a way, it was hard to reconnect with people post-pandemic. But I would say to that veteran teacher, really lean into other people, lean into other students, go observe another teacher teach, get into other classrooms if you can, talk to other teachers about what they're doing in their classroom, and not even your colleagues. Like I'm talking like anywhere in the building, like find someone, a new teacher, a veteran teacher, and just be in another person's room, lean into what they're doing, ask lots of questions. And I feel like when you do that, it does one of two things. It starts to reignite something like, oh my gosh, look at this teacher really having a lot of fun or doing something really incredible. And now you've got a lot of ideas. Or let's say you observe a lesson that totally tanks, right? That is just awful. That in a way is just as valuable as a successful lesson. Alan Moore says you should read not only great books, but books that are terrible too, because then it motivates you to go back and say, well, I can write that. I can write better than that. And it's not that you can teach better than that, but it gives you ideas for like, well, how could I help this person tweak this for next time? And then you're putting yourself in service to somebody else. So I feel like the more we lean on each other, the more we lean on the humanity of teaching and learning, it really does help us pivot and shift our mindset from I'm in this all by myself. I have no one there to support me. I'm just going to do my, day-to-day grind. It gets out of the grind mindset and more into the, I wonder what so-and-so is doing in their room, or having conversations with kids in the hallway. At the elementary school, we're constantly seeing kids in the hallway. Stop and chat, and say hi. And what grade are you in? You're in second grade? That's awesome. Who's your teacher? Oh, I love her. She's amazing. What are you learning about? Like, that's the community of learning that school really should be. And I do believe that the more you do that, the more it lights your fire and gets you pumped to go back to your own classroom and design those learning experiences for your students, those positive learning experiences for your students.
I feel like what you're just describing there is curiosity. And that comes back to our calling as educators and lead learners, is just finding that margin, to finding that energy and commitment to be curious about the people, the human beings right around us. Well, if you're enjoying this conversation, Teachers on Fire, consider adding the Teachers on Fire YouTube channel to your morning commute. Start your day on fire. Adrian, I'd like to start to wrap up, or wind down, let's say, with some biographical questions. You've heard these ones before, so you have a pretty good idea of what's coming, but let's start with this one. Outside of education, what's another area of learning for you? What is it that ignites your passion away from professional learning and the classroom and brings you alive as a human being?
I love poetry. Not too many people know that about me. I love reading poetry. I love writing poetry. I love how it gets my brain thinking in different ways. And then when I go to write poetry, there's a stillness that I need in my mind to really reflect on what I want to say. So I love reading and writing poetry. If I wasn't a teacher, I probably would be a poet. I love poetic language. And so that's definitely something outside of education that definitely keeps me going.
Share about one personal habit or a productivity hack that's maybe something that you do on the daily or on the regular that contributes to your success and keeps your fire burning.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of a little bit every day, slow and steady. So when I was first trying to become a daily reader or a daily writer, I would say a little bit, 5 minutes every day. And doing a little bit of that does add up. It becomes this cumulative effect. And eventually you start scheduling more time. You make more time for it because you love it so much. So that's one productivity hack. If I can't sit down for 30 minutes to write at the end of the day, but I can sit down for 5, I count that as a win. Same thing for reading. If I can read a couple pages, I count that as a win. Would I like to read more? Absolutely. But a little bit every day. And then rest. It's really important to rest. I try and set some boundaries between work and home. And when I'm home, I try and be mindful at home and not take work home. Sometimes it's easier said than done, but I really want to try and value my rest so that when I'm back at work the next day and I'm giving 110%. So.
Point us to an edtech tool that you enjoy using somewhere in your professional practice or classroom.
Oh, I love Microsoft Flip. It used to be called Flipgrid, where kids can record kind of real world style. I don't remember the MTV real world style confessional videos. I love it. So kids can record the reflections. I can embed them directly into our learning management system. I often record reflections myself. It's a great way of building community. It was a lifesaver during the pandemic because kids could record videos of their bedrooms and their pets, and we could talk about them. So video reflection using Flipgrid, that's my favorite edtech tool right now.
Recommend one book, one that you've been reading lately, 2 pages at a time, or one of your all-time faves, and tell us why you recommend it.
Yeah, my all-time favorite book is Don Quixote, big behemoth of a book. I try and read it and listen to it on audiobook every year or so, and I'm just finishing it up. It's just such a great book. I love that book. Then for school, I just finished reading professionally. It's called, it's a book by Scott Dorley and Carissa Carter. And I drawn a blank. It's called Redesigning Tomorrow. That's what it's called. Redesigning Tomorrow. Had a blank there for a minute. Totally not an education related book, but it's definitely something that it pushes your thinking. It's a beautifully designed book. So that's a great book that I just finished reading. Love that.
You talked about a book. Tell us about someone that we should follow on Education X, Instagram, LinkedIn, or Substack, and share why they've been inspiring you lately.
Yeah, Mike Kleba is both on LinkedIn and X. He has a book out that he wrote called Otherful. It's a really wonderful book. He co-wrote it with a coworker of his. I think his name is Ryan O'Hara. And it's this philosophy. It's really influenced me a lot with leaning on others and the collaborative nature of we're in this together. So I highly recommend the stuff that Mike Kleba puts out. A lot of short videos, lots of great content. And then, as you mentioned, his name earlier, Marcus Luther over on Substack and also on X. He's a high school AP Lit teacher who is consistently putting out some of the most helpful and really high quality resources. I teach fifth grade, and I'm looking at his resources and thinking, how can I make my classroom more like an AP Lit class? Because he just has such great resources. He actually turned me on to the reading things 3 times, the Marissa Thompson's TQE protocols. And so I would say Marcus Luther, Mike Kleba, 2 really excellent educators putting some amazing resources out on LinkedIn, Twitter, X, and Substack.
And how do you spell Kleba? How do you spell that last name?
It's Kleba. And the book that he put out is called Otherful. I think they just had an anniversary, so there's an audiobook version. I'm a huge fan of audiobooks, so highly recommend that because he and Ryan are both narrating it, and they're hilarious. So,
just for fun, Adrian, what are you streaming during your downtime right now when your brain has got nothing left for education or Substack writing? What are you watching?
Yeah, I didn't know I was a huge fan of K-dramas, but I'm a huge fan of K-dramas apparently. So I just finished King the Land on Netflix and The Extraordinary Wu. They're both K-dramas. And I know there's a lot of reading with the subtitles, but man, I got sucked into those stories pretty heavily. So just finished streaming both of those.
All right, that's very fun. I have not gotten deeply into the K-drama. A lot of my students are fans, so that is good to hear. Oh, I almost forgot. As we sign off, what are the best ways to connect with you? As you go through some of these, I'll throw your Connect card up on the screen.
Awesome, thanks. Yeah, I spend most of my time on Substack these days, so I try and have something come out every Monday. It's just called Adrian's Newsletter. Not a fancy title, but it's adrianneibauer.substack.com. LinkedIn, I've been there for quite a bit of time, just sharing professional resources, connecting with larger educational networks. And then my YouTube channel it's pretty sparse, but I'm starting to add more YouTube videos on there. It was a place really where I was housing stuff for my students. But there are some things you can view there. And then I share my email address because, part of the Substack community is that I want to be of support to other people. So if people, you can message me through Substack or it goes directly to my Gmail there where I can really collaborate with people and help them, plan projects, find resources for things that they're working on both in and out of the classroom. So you can get a hold of me any one of those ways.
Well, I have to agree with Mark Ryan on LinkedIn. He says, this guy is the real deal. Great episode. Thank you so much, Adrian. You've shared so much insight and continue to inspire me. So thank you for sharing some of your Saturday with the Teachers on Fire podcast. Teachers on Fire. I am your host, Tim Cavey, and I'm so grateful that you too decided to spend some of your day, maybe not a Saturday, but some of your day listening to this podcast. I hope that in some way the content you heard today from Adrian Neibauer sparked your thinking and ignited your practice. And I'll meet you next week right here on the Teachers on Fire podcast. Take care, everyone. Have a great week. Bye-bye.
You can still go. I never answer to no, man, I still go. Go, 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 yeah, go, go, go. Hustle hard, hustle every single day.